It's 6:12 in the morning. A dim kitchen light hums above a chipped wooden table, the kind of light that makes everything look a little more tired than it really is. A man stands barefoot on cold tiles, staring at his phone. Not scrolling, just staring. His bank balance sits there, unmoving, like it's judging him. $47.16. The coffee machine clicks. Empty. He exhales slowly, like he already knew. Outside, a car passes. Inside, nothing moves. Because when you have almost nothing, time doesn't feel like opportunity. It feels like pressure. And every decision, every small, ordinary decision, starts to feel heavier than it should. Even breakfast becomes a question. Even silence becomes loud. And that's where the story begins. At this level of wealth, life is not about dreams. It's about survival disguised as routine. You don't think about investing. You think about making it to Friday. You don't plan your future. You negotiate your present. The grocery store becomes a battlefield of numbers. You don't walk in hungry. You walk in calculating. Eggs or bread? Fuel or food? Comfort or necessity? And slowly, without noticing, you stop asking what you want. You start asking what you can afford to want. That's the first shift. Not in money, but in identity. Because poverty doesn't just limit your lifestyle, it quietly rewrites your expectations of life itself. And the most dangerous part? It starts to feel normal. Then, something changes. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. Maybe it's a better job. Maybe it's a second income. Maybe it's just breathing room. The number on the screen grows, not by much, but enough to stop the panic, enough to feel stable. And suddenly, life looks different. Not bigger, just quieter. Now it's 7:40 in the morning. Same kitchen, but the light feels softer. There's coffee this time, not because it's luxury, because it's no longer a risk. The phone lights up again. $3,482. Not rich, not even close, but something has changed. The decisions don't feel like survival anymore. They feel like choices. And that changes everything. Because at this level, money doesn't buy freedom. It buys space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to make mistakes without collapsing. And for the first time, you start to imagine a future that isn't just getting by. But there's a quiet illusion here. Because stability feels like safety, but it isn't. It's just less chaos. You still check prices, you still hesitate, you still feel the tension when something unexpected happens. A car repair, a medical bill, a missed paycheck. And suddenly the calm cracks. Not completely, but enough to remind you you're not as secure as you feel. You're just temporarily comfortable. And that realization, it does something strange. It pushes you forward, or it traps you right there. Because now you're close enough to see a better life, but not close enough to live it. And that gap, that's where ambition is born, or where frustration begins. Fast forward. The room changes. The city changes. The life changes. Now it's 9:15 a.m. Glass windows. A clean desk. A laptop that doesn't lag. Notifications come in. Meetings. Emails. Numbers. Larger numbers? 5 figures in the account. Maybe 6. And now something interesting happens. Life becomes efficient, predictable, structured. You don't think about bills. They're automatic. You don't think about groceries. They're convenient. You don't think about emergencies. They're manageable. And on the surface, this is what everyone dreams about. Control, stability, comfort. But underneath, a new feeling quietly grows. Expectation. Because once survival disappears, pressure doesn't. It evolves. Now it's not about having enough, it's about not losing what you've built. The fear changes shape. It becomes quieter, more sophisticated, but it's still there. You check investments, you track progress, you compare. Always compare. Because now you're not looking down anymore, you're looking sideways. And sideways is where comparison lives. Colleagues, friends, people your age, people ahead of you, people behind you. And suddenly, life isn't about surviving or stabilizing, it's about winning. Even if no one admits it. You upgrade your life. Better apartment, better car, better experiences.
But here's the truth no one tells you. Every upgrade becomes a new baseline, and every new baseline becomes harder to maintain. So you run faster, work harder, push further. Not because you're desperate, but because you're afraid to go backwards. And backwards now feels unacceptable. Then, one day, something shifts again. Quietly, almost invisibly. The numbers cross a threshold. Not just comfortable, not just stable, but abundant. Now it's 11:30 a.m. A different kind of room. Minimalist, clean, expensive without trying to look expensive. There's no urgency in the air, no rush, no panic. The phone lights up again, but this time you don't check it immediately, because you don't need to. And that's new. At this level of wealth,
money stops being something you think about daily. It becomes something that works in the background, silently, consistently, like gravity. And life begins to feel lighter. Not because problems disappear, but because they no longer feel threatening. They feel solvable, replaceable, manageable. And that changes your relationship with the world. You walk differently. You speak differently. Not louder, just with certainty. Because when you know you're okay, you stop seeking reassurance from everything around you. But something else happens too. Something unexpected. The things that used to excite you don't hit the same. The first paycheck thrill, gone. The first big purchase rush, faded. Even success feels quieter now. Because when everything becomes accessible, nothing feels rare. And when nothing feels rare, what actually matters? So the search begins again. Not for money, but for meaning, for purpose, for something that makes you feel alive. Because here's the paradox. At lower levels of wealth, you sacrifice meaning for survival. At higher levels, you risk losing meaning in comfort. And somewhere in between is where most people spend their entire lives. Not poor enough to be desperate, not wealthy enough to be free. Just existing in the middle. But there's one more level. One that few people talk about honestly. Because it's not about money anymore. It's about power. Now it's 2 p.m. Private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looks smaller from up here. Decisions are no longer personal. They ripple across teams, across companies, across lives. And here, money isn't used. It's deployed. Strategically, quietly, influentially. You don't ask what something costs. You ask what it controls. Because at this level, wealth becomes leverage. Access, influence. Doors open before you knock. Rooms change when you enter. People listen differently, not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. And yet, even here, something remains, a quiet question that never fully disappears. Is this it? Because every level of wealth promises something: safety, freedom, happiness, respect. But each time you arrive, the promise changes. Or maybe you do. And suddenly, we're back. 6:12 in the morning. Same kitchen, same light, same silence. But this time, you're not the same person. Because now you've seen it, felt it, lived every version of it. The struggle, the stability, the success, the power. And you realize something that wasn't obvious before. Your lifestyle doesn't change your life. It reveals it. Because money doesn't remove fear. It changes what you're afraid of. It doesn't create happiness. It removes certain barriers to it. It doesn't give you identity. It amplifies the one you already have. And that man, standing in the kitchen, staring at his phone, he wasn't just looking at a number. He was looking at a version of himself he hadn't met yet.
Because in the end, wealth is not a destination. It's a mirror. And every level shows you something different. Not about money, but about you.